Dr. Sayers, your class that you taught when I was in the program, you gave us a book to read. Remember that book?
I think so.
I think it's...
Franklin Ford's book?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's the title of that book?
How Soccer Changed the World.
How Soccer...
And How Soccer Explains the World.
Yes.
Yeah.
How Soccer Explains the World. Why'd you choose that book?
I think it's an excellent text in terms of its explanations and its anecdotes. Some of them are anecdotes, but it attempts to create a picture of a global sport like soccer, mm-hmm. and how it exists differently in different parts of the globe.
Right.
And clarifies, if that's the best word, the some of the external variables that impact the game in those countries, mm-hmm. and what's unique about them, and which is it's a key theme for our program, as you remember from the trips. Mm-hmm. When we go on these trips, it's a 12-day trip. There's no sort of official sort of numerical sort of tags to these. I'm just going to give a rough example. But what we shoot for is about 75-25 or 80-20 sporting exposure and experience. So we'll visit clubs, associations, mm-hmm. Sporting entities. And then about 20 to 25% cultural. So of the countries that we visit, what can we learn about that country itself, and the history and the political aspect? And then look at the crossroads. How does that impact sport? How do they impact each other? And I think the book does a very succinct job of doing that for various places around the world that we obviously don't visit.
Showing us football and culture.
And culture, yeah, and does a good job of explaining that. It could do with an update. I think that so much has happened recently that it would be there'd be some good additions to that, the concept of that book.
It does do a good job of bringing together the sport and the culture of different places around the globe. Again, me, somebody who is just a casual observer of the sport, I really enjoyed reading it. It gave me a good understanding of how different aspects of the sport are viewed around the globe. And one part that really caught my attention, hooliganism.
Yeah.
Dr. Sayers, this seems to be a part of the soccer culture. You know, intense fervor for their teams, you know, intense fandom that spills over into violence sometimes. What can you tell us about hooliganism?
Yeah, it's got a very dark history.
Yeah.
In Europe and in England specifically, I think the darkest days were the 80s, mm-hmm. And the early 90s. But you're right, it still exists today in some form.
Just fighting in the stadiums?
Yeah. I think what initially began as just fighting in the stadiums over allegiances to certain mm-hmm. teams quickly grew, much more quickly than the authorities could keep up with. It grew into something much bigger, to the point where the association with the teams became a vehicle for the violence. Right. And so there would be, you would follow a particular team, not necessarily just because you liked that team or you were from that area or you wanted to follow that team's results. That was part of it. Mm-hmm. Whereas previously, that's the only reason you follow a team, because you support them. There were sort of hooligan gangs and firms that were created
around some of these teams and
around
fandoms.
The teams. Yeah, so West Ham's firm or Millwall's firm, these London clubs, and there'd be organised meetups when once they would the fighting would happen in the stands, mm-hmm. and then policing would improve, so they could never quite eliminate, but certainly deter and contain that. So they did things like put fencing up mm-hmm. in the front of the stadium to stop fans getting across the field, onto or across the field. They put fences up between the sections of supporters. They would try and keep the away fans in one fenced-in section of the stadium, and this was the home fans. So there was no integration of fans. Well, that was the norm I grew up with. I remember when I moved to America and we went to like a Tennessee football game, and there were
soccer or American football? American
football. Okay. Neyland Stadium, massive, wonderful experience. They were a brilliant team back then. It was the late '90s. They won the national championship within that little time frame. And I remember seeing all the fans all mixed in together. And it was an alien concept because I'd just grown up with segregation, segregation of fans. So once police then were able to control it in the stadiums, it spilled outside, and it became there'd be organised meetups. You know, so many hours before kickoff in this abandoned area or this desolate piece of land.
They have leaders and everything.
Yeah, they'd have leaders. They'd fight, and then they'd go to the game, and sometimes they'd meet up afterwards. And sometimes, if it was a particular teams didn't like each other or groups of supporters that traditionally had tension.
What's the worst you've ever heard of, or have you actually been in close proximity to any of this hooliganism?
Yeah.
What's that like?
A more recent one. I remember being. So two answers to that. One, I remember one time being really scared. I think I was 12 or 13, and I'd gone to Aston Villa versus Coventry City. Aston Villa's in Birmingham, and Coventry City's right next to Birmingham. They're somewhat of a rival. Villa are traditionally a better team, but they're both in the top division at this point. And after the game, Aston Villa's main rival is Birmingham City. Those games can be really ugly, and I've been in one of those where it was when Birmingham got promoted to the Premier League after many years out of it, and we went to the first game at Villa Park, and it was really tense, and there was some fighting afterwards. But the first time was this Coventry game, and I had to get the train back to one of my relatives' house, and I'm on this side of the platform. There's two train tracks, and this platform here, all the Coventry fans were getting the train the other way, and there was some other Aston Villa fans on this platform. They were arguing back and forth, and they started throwing rocks and coins at each other, and the police had to come and try and push them back. And it was, for a 12, 13-year-old, it was quite scary. But then in 2016, the European Championships were in France, and with a friend of mine, I was at the England versus Russia game. Went to Wales games and England games at this tournament, and it was England's first game. It was against Russia. It was in Marseille, and Marseille's got a beautiful port. So the water's here, the boats are here, and there's three sides of little cafes and restaurants and eateries. And we were sitting in one of these, just having some lunch, and there was an evening, the kickoff was later that evening, and there was lots of people there. It was packed. I've got video of it on my phone, or an older phone that's at home. And immediately, out of nowhere, we saw a series of police cars pull up right outside of us. And then immediately after that, across the port, we were on this side and it was over there, so probably just to that other stand, the bleachers on that side of the stadium. We saw a massive smoke bomb go off and cannons, and then bottles started going, and it sort of erupted out of nowhere. And it was all English fans that were there, just enjoying the atmosphere, or not. They were just there experiencing the atmosphere. And then they were somewhat ambushed by Russian fans who came down these little alleyways that led to this port. And it was a really ugly scene. Obviously, glass flying everywhere. I think one person died. There were lots of serious injuries. And it just blew us away because, again, it was 2016. Hooliganism, the authorities are continually attempting to eradicate it.
Are they really, Dr. Sayers?
Yeah.
Because it seems to be a part of the culture.
Yeah.
Are teams being held liable for these, I guess, outbursts and stuff like? Does soccer really want to clean up? Is my question.
I think they do. The question is, how much are they going to invest in that?
Right.
Because the counter argument is, well, soccer creates this, but it's the expense of the policing and that's on the city. So obviously there's relationships between the clubs and the national teams and the police forces, but ultimately they're separate entities.
Because we see here in American sports, if somebody throws something on the basketball court, they may get a lifetime ban from that arena.
Yeah, they do that. They do bans. They've gone through a series of steps to attempt to control it, but the evolution of the concept is typically stays ahead of the authorities, if you like, or when the authorities catch up, they evolve further. Okay. England national team had a very bad reputation for a while, and they would travel abroad and create problems, smash places up, get into fights. Euro 2000, they did it in Charleroi in Belgium. In Dublin in 1995, a game had to be called after, I think, 20-something minutes because the England fans were throwing debris down onto the Irish fans below. Italy 1990, there was trouble. So police then began banning people, but also confiscating passports. So if England had an away game next week, you may have to go and turn your passport into your local police station this weekend, and you go back and get it a week later. Okay. So you can't travel because you had a ban.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. So they are taking steps.
Yeah, they take steps of that regard. There are people that have been banned for life, banned for a year. That was one of the reasons that contributed to the organised meetups outside of stadiums.
Yes. Dr. Sage, you ever thrown a punch in the name of fandom?
No.
No?
No, absolutely. I've never actually been involved in it where I've been attacked. Right. I've just been in the proximity and witnessed it.
When we went overseas, we saw 2 soccer games.
Yeah.
Dr. Sayers, I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I had my head on a swivel. Yeah. Like, I was a little concerned about this. This fandom, this hooliganism. I was looking at my shirt, make sure I had on neutral colors. Yeah. Like, it was really a concern. Yeah. Is it a concern for you attending games perhaps with your children and stuff, or?
No, I wouldn't say a concern. I think it's so sporadic now.
Okay.
That it's not common.
Okay.
There's still a chance, but I think so. Again, as technology has advanced and progressed at a very fast rate, hooligans and hooligan groups would use that as ways to communicate and ways to evade authorities. But authorities have used technology themselves to attempt to continue to keep up with them. CCTV cameras and the like, and monitoring online forums and chats. So my point is, as technology has increased and communication has increased, you could do research prior to a game and have an idea as to whether it's a safe place or perhaps a not so safe place. But there is always the chance that something could spark it, I suppose. Yeah.
And one of the interesting things, when you think of hooliganism, you may assume, these are the dregs of society. No, these might be some people with high standing, like doctors and lawyers and accountants out there fighting and stuff.
Absolutely. There's an element of sort of fight club to that.
Yes.
If you have a certain societal role, Monday to Friday, even a fairly high one, so to speak, as you say, lawyer, doctor, etc., it's somewhat of a release on the weekend and somewhat of a release, I guess. But it's an interesting one for sure.
For sure.